Justice under law, justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law, justice the people demand. Right to life and security.
It's a very, 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 very happy Monday. Welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice. My name is Mikkel Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
And I'm Jade Williams, Policy Research and Advocacy Manager at JFJ.
So, listeners, thank you so much. For those who follow politics, you know that the gate, it's open. And I want to encourage all of us to exercise our constitutional right to vote. And yeah, so September 3 is the date, Jade. And I hope you have your ID ready.
It is ready.
I don't have mine, but I will do this, the oath.
And I hope as my employer, you are aware that we have to get the time to go and vote.
Well, as a representative of the organization, I don't go in office on election. I have my things set up wherein I have my faces, wherein independent candidate, those who are vying on behalf of a political party, and I stay home and I tick off and I vote, by the way, by 7 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Yes, I'm one of those people.
Amazing.
And then you drive around in the constituencies and you see what's happening and then you feel the excitement. So I normally apply for half of the day.
I see.
Yes.
I see.
You have to be at office for your next couple hours though, right? Because some people have to be there.
No,
That's fair.
That's fair.
Okay.
That's fair.
All right, welcome again. So we're going to be talking occupational safety and health bill today with attorney at law, Kadra Folks, who is a specialist in labor matters. So we're certainly happy to have her be with us in a few minutes, right?
Yes.
So, on a sadder note, over the weekend, Saturday night, I believe, news broke that a law enforcement officer was shot and injured, and his wife was passed, shot and killed, and we recently learned that his son succumbed to his injuries, only 5 years old. And it is such a blatant disregard for life, what happened. And we're not too sure of the details surrounding the incident. But our condolences to the officer, and we hope that he will have full recovery and get the necessary support, given that both his wife and child were killed in this attack. I don't think words can really express how strong we condemn this violation. And I can't imagine what the JCF family is going through at this time. But on behalf of Jamaicans for Justice, to our officers who are putting their lives at risk daily, continue to be vigilant, be safe, and, we take note that 2 of the persons who are thought to be involved were shot and killed. So, we do hope as further investigation unfolds that these are the persons who are in fact responsible, so that the family can take some comfort, if you will. But strongest condemnation to this most unfortunate incident. And again, our prayers are with the family. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, so the trivia for today?
Yes, so we'll move over to the trivia question for today, and it is related to our topic. The question is, which legislation passed in 1943 will the Jamaica Occupational Safety and Health Bill replace to improve workplace safety for all Jamaican workers? So essentially, which legislation is the OSHA bill replacing? Right, so if you know the response, you can respond in the YouTube chat on Nationwide's YouTube channel. You can respond in our WhatsApp at 2397583, or you can respond on Instagram at JA4Justice.
Yeah, I'm seeing wherein, you know, just to indicate, the first media had reported that both mother and son had passed, and that was incorrect. And we were subsequently told that the child was in intensive care. But I recall reading something that the child has succumbed to his injuries. If that is in fact so, that would be welcome news, certainly. I'm just checking the media reports very quickly to see if, yes, the Gleaner reported earlier that the child had later succumbed to his injuries, unfortunately. So again, gruesome attack, you know. And as a parent, I just can't imagine what that officer, if he makes it, what he will be going through. But yes, our condolences again. All right, so while we wait, we didn't write anything, but just to switch back, given that let me take pause on that, and then we discuss towards the end of the program. Ms. Folks is on, so I think we can start with today's topic, and I want the listeners to pay keen attention, because this proposed bill, we have been discussing it for over 2 decades, actually, the Occupational Safety and Health Bill. And I see where somebody who got it correct. I see where somebody won the trivia already. Is it news commentator?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
So the Occupational Safety and Health Bill, we have been discussing it for over 2 decades, as I just indicated, and it was designed to repeal the Factories Act of 1943. So news commentator got the answer correct already.
Yes.
And for those who recall the experiences of COVID, we know the challenges there, and people were saying that had we the OSHA for short, then some of the rights that would protect workers in terms of what support employers are obligated to provide for you. What are some of the liabilities that we can think of, not only in the public sector, but in the private sector as well? And we take note that in 2017, there was actually a bill that was tabled in Parliament. I believe a joint select committee was established a few years after, about 2020. I recall some meetings being had.
They started from 2019.
From 2019, okay. And since that, we've heard several announcements, and you can just quickly go through those announcements of what the government had hoped to achieve over those years.
Yes, well, we did get a statement from the Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, in 2019, indicating a potential passing of the bill in December of that year. But we know an election would have taken place, and that did not come to fruition in 2021.
That was September 3, 2020.
Yes. So in 2021, the then State Minister of Labour and Social Security, Xavier Main, again indicated a passing, or a potential passing, for that financial year. That did not happen in 2022. We saw Labour and Social Security Minister Carl Samuda indicate similarly that they would be moving forward with a redrafting process that was on its way to completion, and we would be seeing the bill passed by that financial year, 2022-2023, in 2024, and then most recently in May of 2025, we saw statements from our current Minister of Labour and Social Security, Pernell Charles Jr., who stated that they were again targeting completion for the end of this year, and that it was a priority on the ministry's agenda.
All right. So, now that Parliament is officially dissolved, or the Prime Minister will so advise the Governor General. But we can expect no more parliamentary sittings before September 15. Yeah?
Right.
So what exactly can we reasonably expect? The question is before the end of the year, we hope, and we shall see. But we have Kadra folks on. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Michael and Jade, and to your listeners as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. So, English-speaking Caribbean, we've been fighting for labor rights as far back as, let me use modern history, 1938 labor riots. So, what exactly can you give us in terms of a little bit of a historical overview of the OSHA, just to put some context for our listeners?
All right. So, Cabinet in sometime in the 90s made a decision that this is a legislation that we need to have as a country. Now, the policy behind this kind of approach in terms of legislation is guided by conventions and recommendations of the International Labour Organization, which far predate this decision by Cabinet. Occupational safety and health is really concerned with conditions of employment in terms of the physical environment. And so whereas other legislation treats with terms and conditions, maternity leave, vacation leave, sick leave, occupational safety and health is concerned about how the human interacts with the environment. And so in terms of context as to the legislation, that is how this legislation is different from the other legislation that we have. All right, so I said in the 90s, there was a decision, that's about 27 years ago, there was a decision by Cabinet to have this legislation. Now, in terms of the legislative process, you usually start with a policy, either an actual policy or a policy decision, and Cabinet decision reflects and confirms that decision that it's the government was of the view that there's a gap in our legislative framework, right?
Yes.
And so how things are to progress is that you would have a draft of the bill, and the persons involved in the drafting of that legislation would be the officers, the technocrats in the ministry which owns the legislation, which in our situation is the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. But just to add to that, that there are other stakeholders. For instance, NEPA would have an interest, the Ministry of Health would have an interest, right? Because the health component especially is very wide. It has to do with physical health. It also has to do with environmental health, all right?
Yes.
And so all these stakeholders would bring to bear on the drafting of the legislation, of course, informed by existing policy locally and internationally in terms of, as I mentioned, ILO conventions and ISO standards, right? So having settled that, agreeing that this is the way forward in terms of what you now have on paper, then that bill is to be circulated among stakeholders, wider circulation for feedback. Typically first among the labor tripartite, which would involve the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions and the Jamaica Employers Federation, because any legislation, any labor legislation in Jamaica has to have the involvement of the labor tripartite, which is the government, the unions representing workers, and the unions representing employers. So after they have had sight and given their feedback, then there's wide and broader consultation. Then you have tabling in Parliament. Now, we have gone as far as the table in Parliament. I think that was done in probably 2017.
Yes.
And then that bill that was tabled was discussed in up to 2019 or 20, I think up to 2020.
Yes, up to 2020.
Right. And so because it's a technical legislation, what happened is that Parliament convened a joint select committee to consider the bill, to ensure that you don't just blindly agree to something, that stakeholders, there is room for representation, for concerns to be aired, and for further refining. However, coming out of that process, that's what happened is that based on the feedback, it was thought that it was necessary to go back to the drawing board and do some further refining. And so we're at the stage now where, based on my last update, there is a bill. The bill has been reworked based on that feedback and other considerations. And there is a bill which is within the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, which is again going through another round of refining and consultation.
So, I'm thanks so much for that, Ms. Folks. Just to set a little bit of a context for our listeners. I think we're coming up on the break. Yes, we're up on the break now. But when we return, I want you to break it down for the listeners in a very practical way that they can understand what exactly you mean for the physical environment and what are some of the key provisions that were being discussed as a part of the bill and just generally the implications for workers. We take the break.
When you want the food, shell and make the rice well. Just gimme me Kendall. Kendel. Gimme me Kendall.
Another quality product from the CariMed Group.
Just gimme me Kendall.
The time by Kendall Foods. The taste of quality is
1:15.
Truth is, HIV affects everyone. Truth is, avoiding care leads to a weaker immune system. That means you could get really sick. The truth is, the hardest pill to swallow isn't the medication. It's the problems that follow when you don't take them. Let's get through this together. Remain in care. You can live life to the fullest with HIV. And that's the truth. A message from the Ministry of Health and Wellness.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We've been unpacking the Occupational Safety and Health Bill with Kadra Folks, attorney at law. Before the break, Ms. Folks, you gave us a bit of the historical context of occupational safety and health here in Jamaica. I'm hoping you can give us an idea now of what some of those key provisions that were considered were and what some of those implications would be for a regular worker here.
Okay, Jade. So, all right. So let's start with what we have. We have the Factories Act, which speaks to hazards within the factory setting. So the Factories Act would have come out of a context where we had growth in that industry and persons were being injured by hazards. So that legislation would talk about like guarding machinery and all of that. But most of us no longer work in factories, and which is why it's outdated, which is why it's not responsive to the needs of the current labor force. A lot of us work in offices. No hazards. So occupational safety and health is about identifying hazards, assessing the risks, and implementing control measures. The thing with hazards is that they're very situational. So hazards, for instance, have a physical hazard. The hazard that you have in a factory is not necessarily the same kind of hazard that you have in the office that needs the admin support for that factory, for instance. And so it's very important that we have a legislation that recognizes that recognizes the fundamental principle in terms of managing hazards and also has a risk management formula, so to speak, or approach. What do I mean by that? Okay, having identified the hazard, which for instance is biological. COVID was a biological hazard, by the way.
Yes.
And during COVID, persons were saying that, oh, the ASH bill will have to be updated anyway to address COVID. But no, this is a legislation that responds to all types of hazards, even AI, right?
Okay.
To understand what a hazard is. So you have a biological hazard, you can have a physical hazard. In an office, you might have ergonomic hazard, where you can have musculoskeletal disorders based on the positioning of a chair, a computer. The lighting on a computer can affect somebody's eyes. Those are hazards, okay? If you're working on a construction site, for instance, you are at risk of falling from height, for instance. So you might want a fall arrest system. But one of the interesting things coming out of COVID, there's a decision in the US where it was recognized that work from home and remote work can even be one of those control measures that you can implement for occupational safety and health. And so when you identify the hazards, remember I told you that hazards are in different categories: biological, physical, chemical, ergonomic, for instance, and you assess the risk and you want to manage that hazard now, then you look to see what control measures are appropriate. And in the context of COVID, there was a decision with someone who had some kind of lung disorder, and she wanted to work from home to minimize the exposure to COVID. And this, but she actually sought redress under the Disabilities Act in that jurisdiction. And what they found was that remote working was an appropriate control measure. And so, for instance, we have 6 buildings in Jamaica a control measure that you can implement is have persons work remotely until you're able to remove the hazard or eliminate, eliminate or minimize the hazard, right? In terms of some specific provisions, let me just backtrack a little bit. So one of the things that I always highlight is how far-reaching the legislation is supposed to be. So traditional labor laws are only concerned with employees in an employment relationship. You have to have a contractual relationship.
Miss Fox? We lost her a bit. Right, so while we wait on Miss Folks to get back, I remember during COVID, one of the concerns that came about was what do employers owe their employees even while you're working from home? And I remember several private sector companies had to actually put together some financial support to ensure that their employees can, enjoy. We never do that because even though we respect human rights, we don't have the monies, right? But we should be thinking about these things.
Yes.
But this particular private sector company, I recall, they provided some financial support for their employees to buy chairs, appropriate chairs,
Right.
and support,
Desks and
so that while you were working from home, they ensured that there was some safety standards for their employees, which is quite important. And the other things that Ms. Folks was mentioning, how do you ensure that there's safety standards applied when you have the hazards? Because quite a bit of times you are watching the news and you hear that this building has some, what you call it, mold and so on.
Yes. We've heard some recent
Yes.
stories locally as well.
And then sometimes they don't even see it, But again, what do employees owe employees in those situations when they're real cost to think about? I'm thinking about some smaller companies now, smaller NGOs, wherein I can tell, when I tell people how budget line work in NGO life, you get a budget line that says light bill, utilities, and you can't use it for anything else. But our donors, when you respect human rights, how do we really think about these types of rights respecting budget lines? It's something to really consider, even for us here within the NGO setting.
Yes, because I have to ask if I develop carpal tunnel from all the typing I do.
You see, she know. One thing with Jade, listeners, she knows every sickness that is out there.
Well, you don't know to seek treatment if you don't know. Do we have back Miss Folks?
She watched too much House, Gregory House, right? And Dr. Watson, that's a new one. You watch too much of them, Jade.
Well, all I can say is, as a worker,
Yes.
who is looking out for my safety and well-being, right? I have to ensure that I know the kinds of things that can arise, the challenges that can arise in an environment like a workplace environment. And as Miss Folks was saying, we're coming out of factories now. So prior, we might be thinking about real physical injury. You might pull a muscle in your back, or you lift something heavy, you might decapitate a limb using the machine in the factory. But now we're thinking about still real hazards, but not so easily identifiable. If my desk is too high and I have to lean over it, can cause damage to my lower back. Maybe I need something that matches my height, or an adjustable chair or something like that.
But what is concerning for me? I knew about OSHA within the context of the HIV sector. That's how I knew about it.
Yes.
But it's so far-reaching and so much bigger than that. And in a dispensation of AI and so on, I'm a little bit concerned at the pace at which our governments across successive administration have been moving. It's quite concerning. But we have Miss Folks back on.
Yes, and as you said AI, I wanted you to pick back up on that point, that the bill kind of covers quite a few things without those things having been thought of at the time.
Yes. Okay, that's the question.
No, just pick up
where you were.
And where we
The
lost
thing
it.
about is that apparently I was talking to myself for quite a while. So where did I leave off?
The last thing I recall was you said, let me back up a little bit. And then you started giving broader context by mentioning even the context of AI and the fact that we are now in this new dispensation rather of technology and the implications of OSHA. That's the last thing I recall you saying.
Right. So what is the threat that AI poses? Well, AI can pose a psychosocial hazard to safety and health because people tend to be concerned about losing their jobs. That's an existing hazard. Um, in a physical context, you have physical hazard to safety and health. So if there's a robot that you're working with and you think it might malfunction and harm you, there are already physical hazards to safety and health that would cover. So that's why I'm saying that if you think about, if we understand occupational safety and health and what currently exists, then we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to get that legislation passed. And if there's anything that needs to be tweaked or anything like that, then we can work on that. You know, it's not something that we should try and perfect from the outset, because I think that's a challenge we're having.
Yes.
Trying to perfect this legislation when other jurisdictions, they have had a first iteration and they have improved on it, they have added regulations, that kind of thing. I think that's where we need to be. But the legislation, if it is that we follow, and can I tell you the 2018, the 2017 draft was actually reviewed and approved at certain levels. So you understand that it's consistent with international requirements. So in terms of the reworking, it will be interesting to see what has been taken out, and what has been added in. But one of the things I want to mention in terms of policy and legislating with occupational safety and health, there's a very important right to a worker to cease unsafe work. And that is probably one of those provisions that might get pushed back from employers. But if you remember, for instance, that Burger King incident where, the gas was installed. That's the LPG gas, and it was installed, and then somebody smelled gas, and they were assured, no man, it's okay, and of course you know what happened. Now, in that situation, as a worker, where you, as far as you're concerned, if you're there all along, the gas change is replaced, and you never had that concern before, but here it is at this occasion, you smell gas. And you use gas at home, and you know when the regulator not on properly. And so now you're using your judgment, you're going to say, no man, this not feel safe. Now, under this legislation, it allows for a worker to cease unsafe work. So if you perceive that you're in imminent danger of harm, of some risk of occurring, then you can notify relevant persons and have them address it. In that context, though, what the control that the law would put in is that you don't get to go home, you don't get a day off necessarily. You're to make yourself available to do other work in the interim until that situation is addressed. And of course, that is complemented by the safety and health representative. So every work group or every workplace, if it's a small workplace, is to have somebody on location who is aware of the hazards that are associated with the particular work process. And what that basically means is that in that situation, you would have needed, you say, okay, we have a fire hazard here, we have this kind of hazard, that kind of hazard. That worker would have been able to escalate to that other person, who would then now be required to call in the relevant personnel to make their assessment before the job is cleared for the worker to continue.
So to clarify, under OSHA, and I use OSHA for short, Occupational Safety and Health Act, but it's still a bill. Under OSHA, there is a requirement for companies to basically have an established officer identified.
Yes, so what happened is that, and it's not just under the bill. This is giving effect to requirement. Remember, I told you that the bill is based on international standards.
Yes.
So, Convention 155, so on. And so that's a recommendation that, it's a part of getting compliance. So when you have workers involved in the work process, so you understand that, okay, this is what we needed to do. This is why we needed to do it. And this is the person who's going to ensure that it gets done. And so for every work group or for each work process in the organization, there should be a designated person who is a safety and health representative who is trained in risk management. So they know what hazards obtain in that particular state. They're trained to identify them, they're trained to assess the risk, and they're trained to make recommendations or, in the interim until things can be escalated. If they can prevent something happening, they're trained on how to do that. It's just like how you work in a factory and you operate in a factory then and you operate in a machine and something goes wrong. And there's somebody there who knows that, okay, don't put your hand in here so your finger will get cut off.
Yes.
Let me do this. You understand?
Yes.
And bribe, something like that, because the main thrust of the legislation is to prevent.
Yes. Hold that thought for me, Miss Folks. We have to take the break, and then on the other side, we pick up with what the processes are to have your rights realized, whether there's a tribunal and so on being proposed. Please stay with us.
At the Jamaica Customs Agency, we care for our employees, customers, stakeholders, citizens, and our country. Customs cares. The temperature by the Jamaica Customs Agency is
33 degrees Celsius here in Kingston and 31 in Montego Bay.
Are you finding back to school expenses overwhelming? You're not alone. Many parents feel the pressure of school expenses. Make this year worry-free with a Smart Start Back to School loan from the National PC Bank. This loan is affordable and accessible. No collateral required. Get approval in as little as 48 hours so that you may shop in time. Plus, apply now for the chance to win a $10,000 book voucher. This offer is seasonal. Apply now before the new school term begins. Make this year stress-free with a Smart Start Back to School loan from the National PC Bank.
Track and Field's global showpiece heads back to Asia for its 2025 staging. The World Athletics Championships from Tokyo, Japan is live on Nationwide 90 FM. September 13 to 21.
Great start from Seville, who's got a little bit of a march on Noel Lyles. Seville's going to win this. Brilliant race. He even has time to salute.
How will the Jamaicans stack up? The likes of Kishane, Oblique, Nikisha, Tina, Sherika, and Lavelle, all seeking podium spot.
Really good running on the near side too from Tia Clayton. Tia Clayton takes it there.
And the world will say goodbye to Shelley-Ann Fraser-Pryce.
Watch for Shelley-Ann Fraser-Pryce.
She brings the curtain down on her 18-year career. She goes back to where it all started.
And she's going to do it. Shelley-Ann Fraser-Pryce.
Live every moment from the World Athletics Championships from Tokyo, Japan, September 13 to 21 live with a kind of coverage only Nationwide 90 FM provides.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are unpacking the Occupational Safety and Health Bill, hoping that we can see the passage of that proposed legislation before the end of the year, based on the commitments that we've heard from successive Labour ministers. We're discussing the bill with Cadre Folks, attorney at law. Before the break, Ms. Folks, you were explaining that the proposed bill, in keeping with international standards, would see a designated officer that each company, hopefully, if it is accepted, based on those standards, will identify, because the purpose, as you were indicating, is to prevent. Now, if there are challenges internally, who do I make a complaint to as a staff member? If you could just explain both that internal review, if you will, and then externally.
All right. So if you have an issue, a safety and health issue at work, it is considered a grievance. And so whatever mechanism is in place for dealing with a grievance is what you would engage as a worker. Mm-hmm. Of course, with the legislation in place, then you'll have the added, in terms of, all right, so normally with a grievance, for instance, you make a report to HR to say, hey, I have this issue, and that I'd like to have addressed. But with safety and health, no, then you would have another layer where you probably go to your safety and health representative in the event that it's something that can be resolved at that level. And if not, say for instance, there's a need for equipment. Am I on?
Yes, we're hearing.
Okay. In case there's a need for the employer to get equipment or personal protective equipment, for instance, that's something that would definitely need to be escalated. All right. So because it's a grievance, as far as I'm aware, I haven't seen the most recent iteration, but as far as I'm aware, there's no intention to create a separate tribunal necessarily. What could really happen is that it could be treated as an industrial dispute and perhaps go to the IDT. There is a scope for that. I mean, there is also the scope, depending on how the administrative arrangement is set up, because in recent times I hear stronger arguments in favor of occupational safety and health being managed separate from the Ministry of Labour. And that it's almost like, what you call it now? So it will be separate from the Ministry of Labour, right? And so in that context, you definitely have a tribunal. But currently, what we're obtaining is that you just report the matter as a grievance, and the grievance procedure would follow. And of course, it can become an industrial dispute because it has to do with the terms and conditions of employment, and in that way, you can access redress through the Ministry of Labour. If it is that you're injured, though, then that's a different thing. That's a matter of a civil claim, and then you would have to commence a claim whether in the parish court or in the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And so what is being proposed currently, I am not sure, because if they become, why am I not remembering that term? It's like TAG. It's separate. It's not part of line ministry, right?
Or if they have an executive agency?
Executive agency.
Okay.
Right. Thank you so much. So an executive agency, if you have that set up, that apparently that's one of the things that's being discussed. In most recently in a forum, I became aware that is now back on the table, how it is to manage this thing, because one of the suggestions is that the Ministry of Labour is, for instance, an employer. It's not for instance. The Ministry of Labour
is an employer, yes.
Right. And so to have that body regulate safety and health might create some difficulty. Some administrative difficulties.
Yes, because we've I mean, without causing, without giving any credence to certain things, but we've seen where the Ministry of Labour itself, we've gotten complaints at JFJ about concerns, and we've seen some in the public space. So I was keen on understanding as well if it is the Ministry of Labour itself as an employer who a grievance has been submitted against, how that would be managed.
Right. So the thing about it is that if it is that to get the legislation passed, then that is going to be the setup. Then I would suggest that, even though it's something that can be worked on, right? You can build out on that. It is somewhere to start. Yes. Because there is a fully functioning safety and health department within the ministry. They have been piloting this legislation. So if that is where we're going to start, I would not push back on that. But just to say that, there can be a better setup, and that's something that we can work to achieve. Yes. But the expense of setting up a tribunal and all of that might set us back further. So I would not push back on that.
No, I agreed, because I think sometimes when we try for perfection, all it does is to result in delay. So I do agree with you that it's best that we move with some alacrity in passing this bill before the end of the year, given that we've been having discussions for several years now, and then you fix whatever hiccups in a 1 year or so review period. You have a 1 year implementation, you look at the hiccups, and then you amend based on those issues identified.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. All right. Is there anything else you think workers should be aware of? How do we get the public engaged in this call, Miss Folks? Because I think sometimes, we're not paying attention to some of these issues, and therefore the public outcry to put a little bit of a pressure on the government, whomever the new cabinet will be post September 3.
So I'm also president of the Jamaica Occupational Health and Safety Professionals Association, and we are an advocacy body, and equally important, it's an association comprised of safety and health professionals, and so we're always willing to educate, to train. Sometimes persons have concerns about the bill. From time to time it comes up, and we might feel questions. We're quite happy to do that. Any level of engagement in order to get this legislation going. And one of the things that we're recommending is that we have a group that is set up, a working group that's set up to ensure that when the bill goes back to Parliament, it's not so much about defending, because we have already created the space to have the dialogue and to get some of the kinks out of the way, because we can't afford for this to be snake and ladder again. You reach so far, you understand, each time you make one step forward and you make 10 steps back.
Yes.
So in order to prevent that, I'm thinking that level of stakeholder engagement needs to happen up front. And so organizations such as Joshua will be useful in that, because I'm counsel but I'm the only lawyer in Joshua currently, right? These are people who are on the ground. These are the people who wear the steel-toe shoes and the hard hat, the academics, right? These people, I represent a group of persons that know this thing. And for us to not know what is going on with the bill is very concerning, because at the end of the day, when we're invited to a joint select committee and we're going to make certain comments, we don't want to have to be holding back our hand because we want the legislation passed.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes.
We still want it to meet a certain standard at the very least. So that level of engagement, I know there's a way to do things that up to a certain point a bill is a confidential document, but I think that some special provisions or considerations need to be put in place when it comes to OSHA. It's been too long.
Yes, agreed.
It's been too long, and we have the resources. There are people who ready, willing, and able. There are people whose jobs will be made easier if this legislation is implemented. Can you imagine trying to get an employer to conform and do things that no law says that they're to do, which is gonna be more than likely expensive or costly? You understand? In addition to which, and it's not necessarily about the expense of it, because not every control measure is going to be expensive. Sometimes it's a lack of information, but then nobody's going to listen because there's nobody requiring you to do this.
We're hoping that some basic ethical standards would so apply.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't think we're here, some countries miss folks. If companies do not adhere to those ethical standards, you have citizens that will boycott and get them into compliance. I don't think we have that culture here.
No, but one of the things, though, and I heard in another forum where investors, when they're looking to invest their money, safety and health, if you're not compliant, if there aren't procedures in place, if there's not a legislative framework in place, it's a risk. It's a business risk.
Yes.
And so a prudent investor gonna look and say, but wait, so you can actually work from height and not have a fall arrest system? That kind of thing, because if somebody falls, the expense of that lawsuit, why not just prevent it?
Yes. Yeah, excellent point. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, too.
We really do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to be with us.
My absolute pleasure.
All right. That was Casual Folks Attorney at Law discussing the Occupational Safety and Health Bill. And listeners, just a little bit of a last call again. Get involved and use the knowledge that we're gaining here together to make some push to Parliament. It's manifesto time now. We want to see some of these things in the manifestos, yes? I'm asking yes as if the listeners are going to respond. But I expected you to say yes.
What I do want to see for sure, because I've seen several ministers of Labour say that, changes have been made after following review of the bill. So the bill that we have seen may have been changed from the way it is. And I know that there are some provisions in there that I was particularly interested in, like those related to HIV, because like you, that's how I came to know about the bill as well, working in the HIV sector.
The bill that bought from Wapikil fellow. Is the saying go?
Yes.
Listen, it has been far too long, man. We need to move. I was so heartened when I heard Minister Pernell Charles Jr. saying that it's a priority of the government, but we haven't heard anything beyond the statements. I think we have to look at really moving with it. Can you imagine your some of your basic labor rights are governed by a 1943 legislation?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. The limitation is just, as Kaja said, is just only covering a factory environment. Like, I can think of no person I personally know that is working in a factory environment at this time. So, there are just a lot of gaps.
Yeah. All right. Let's take the break. And then on the other side, I have some thoughts, Jade. And we're having discussion about what happens in Parliament, and we're looking forward to another 5-year period post September 15. Life of Parliament. And, I'm just keen on understanding what we're asking for as citizens within the context of governance, some of our more fundamental rights, and how we look at some of these things as we head into an election, the importance of it within the context of this discussion that we're about to have. We take the break.
We're making the markets better for you. In the last financial year, more than $100 million was spent on repairs for Sentence Bay, Ocho Rios, Santa Cruz, and the Yallas markets. We completed phase 1 of the new Buff Bay market, and the final phase will be completed before the end of this year. Alexandria and the Spalding markets are set for rehabilitation in this financial year. The Ministry of Local Government and Community Development is working to modernize our markets, making them more convenient for doing business. Local government is working for you.
You hear, say nationwide back to school fair get pushed back to August 23?
What? Push back? Lord, man, me need ready to go Harmony Beach Park, you know.
Yeah, man, but them push it back to make it bigger and better. More vibes, more giveaways, and more things for everybody enjoy.
So tell me something. The book swap still have a one?
Yes, man. Still bring the books the kids don't need, and them can swap it for the ones them can use. Plus, them are gonna have health screening, school supplies for buy, banks and location, and enough giveaways.
Alright, me like the sound of that. But anything else I want?
Then no must. Me hear say them have domino tournament, scavenger hunt, and beer things for the whole family. So make sure you register.
Register? So how me have to go register now if we go in if it's free?
Because once you register, you automatically get entered to win the grand prize in the special raffle.
Me have to go call up some of my friends them cause we can't miss this. So tell me now, what the new date?
August 23, same place, Harmony Beach, Montego Bay, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Nationwide 90 FM's Back to School Fair. Bigger, better, and full of vibes.
All right, welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We were discussing earlier the Occupational Safety and Health Bill. One of those pieces of legislation that we've been calling for. As I said, we made that call within the context of the HIV sector, but when you listen to Ms. Folks and how broad it is, how important it is to ensure that your basic safety and health standards and rights as employees are protected in the workplace, and yet we have a 1943 legislation, really providing that limited and outdated guidance. So I think these are the things, as we have this particular show, the Let's Start Justice, I want us to think about as citizens. What exactly are we calling on our governments for? And with that in mind, Jade, people are we're entering an election period, and one of the things I look at, whichever political party you vote for, what exactly are we voting on? What guides our reason for voting? What calls are being made? And the importance of a manifesto, which a lot of people tend to disregard. But, as we have that conversation, I want to put in context. In the United Kingdom, you have a convention, not law, convention. Convention is something you do over time. It becomes an unwritten law, but a rule, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So in the UK, you have what you call the Salisbury Convention. So in 1945, to avoid a constitutional crisis, this particular convention came about that really governs how the House of Lords and the House of Commons operate. Simply, which is the lower house and the upper house. House of Representatives here where your MPs sit, and the Senate. So we know that in the UK, the House of Lords, it can't veto a legislation, but it can certainly cause a delay. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to an election promise that a political party has made by way of its manifesto, the Salisbury Convention is that, one, you can't cause a significant delay in what was promised to the people by a political party, nor can you propose amendments that will see significant changes to what was intended. To just show you how important a manifesto is. Yet in Jamaica today is August 11, and I still don't know what the two main political parties are promising us when it comes to our health, when it comes to the education sector, when it comes to some of these key pieces of legislation that we're having a discussion about. What about employees' rights? What about, I stated that I still don't know to this day what the comprehensive positions are for the two political parties on constitutional reform. You make a promise last election that within 100 days, has that changed? Because you see some wavering happening based on who is speaking. The People's National Party, we know where they stand with CCJ, but what else?
Yeah, what about the
what
rest of the
guides?
process?
How do I hold you accountable if on August 11, I don't know what you're promising me? One political party say that they will be launching a manifesto tomorrow. The others say that they're finalizing it. But I think we need to do better.
I do like what you said, that UK approach to the manifesto, because I find that, in many places where that's not the case, it's a PR move. You put out your manifesto and it just has the best of the best sounding things, but not necessarily things that you can be held to account for. Even if we're to monitor it, what mechanisms, and you'd know more than me, but what mechanisms would there be to say as a citizen, okay, I voted for this based on the manifesto, and now it has not been implemented within the time period that you promised. Is there anything that exists now as our law is that I could even do as a citizen?
If they don't fulfill a promise,
right?
You wait out the election, the 5-year period. You wait it out, because this is it. I touched on it, and I see colleagues, our board director, for example, on Twitter talking about the impeachment bill, and he's absolutely correct. And we recommended that we look at impeachment, but to look at other jurisdiction that has more of a judicial role in the process. So rather than the impeachment that is very political in the United States, you look at how you can have the judiciary more involved in the process, similar to Brazil, which they have their own concerns, their challenges. But how do we look at these things? But an impeachment, Jade, without separating the two branches of government, the executive and the legislature, will make no sense in Jamaica. But interestingly, you don't hear one of the political parties talking about the right to recall. Not one. Not one. And the right to recall is the power of the people. I vote you in, I should be able to vote you out before waiting for that 5-year period.
Right.
Who is championing that? Where are these third political parties, by the way? The NDM, if you go on their site, that's the National Democratic Movement. They have a constitutional document that they were proposing. I think it may need some update. But I don't know what the other political parties have in terms of that comprehensive document. But I know that it doesn't exist. So when I frame the question that way, it doesn't exist. But it's a question, how do we hold our leaders accountable? The technically speaking, the parliamentary opposition, if we did not have this strong two-party structure, a vote of no confidence could cause some hiccups in Parliament, but we already know how that happens. Most laws are passed with simple majority, so it means a single political party run things, right? Unless it reach the threshold of entrenched provisions and so on. It's them run things. So it passed through lower house, passed to upper house, and then the parliamentary opposition begs and you see them gather them paper with excitement and walk out, and the media reports opposition walks out of Parliament, and the other political party his teeth and say, "Go along where you go," and pass what they're passing just the same, right? So it's a little bit of a food for thought about how we look at accountability and just ensuring that some of our fundamental issues are being addressed, and just an electorate. I mean, we all vote for whatever reasons. But the issue-based voter, and let me be very clear, even a transactional voter, somebody who votes because you promised me a better student loan benefits, it is still issue-based.
It's an issue-based
right?
voter, yeah.
But do we understand the issues? Do we understand, again, the civics of how our country operates? And it's a lot of things that we're contemplating, and I think we really need a discussion on just how the government operates, the gaps in it, so that we can have citizens who are calling for these fundamental changes, whatever they are, a little bit more. Your thoughts as a youngster? I passed youth stage with the last birthday held in July,
Honestly, similar to you, I'm hoping to see something coming out that would address some concerns of mine in terms of what the manifestos come to. But I find that amongst my peers, we are an emotional voter base and not so much an issue-based voter base, so it's like there's a level of, how has this platform made me feel? How has these discussions made me feel? Do I want to keep having discussions like this going forward? And that's what kind of influences them to go out to the polls, less so than directly what is in the manifesto addressing this and this thing.
They're not reading it.
Well, then most of them now see it.
and it's so important. I remember the JLP manifesto had the National Health Insurance plan, which I was wondering how they put it in it. I was thinking it was a new promise being made. I guess I didn't remember that it was also in the 2016 manifesto. That's the level of detail I read these manifestos with. And how many of us are insured? Why are we not pushing this? Why was this not a main thing to Minister Dr. Tufton? And what of the even the statements made by opposition leader when he met with the disabilities sector recently? What are we calling for? We just need to have the discussions a little bit more. But it's so important that I hear more from shadow cabinet and the current. We don't know what the new cabinet will look like, because we don't know, we await the results of the election. But it's these are the things I would want more as we help the public along with making these calls of accountability. And linking it back to some of the critical things that we have as concern. And for me, I want a complete overhaul of our electoral process. I'm not a fan of first past the post system, but you see, it's a lot of things. It's not easily understood, but who's breaking it down for the people?
Well, you will.
I know we have people like Clyde Williams I can call on, who's also passionate, but we do need it a little bit more. And then I think once you want to know about misinformation and misunderstanding, go on social media.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping at some point we can explain, because I was reading one person who said that the Constitution says that election must be held by September 3, and I'm like, where in the Constitution it says that?
And you know what's funny? I think Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs was at pains to explain that a couple weeks back.
Yes, but I do have some challenges with that, though, because I mean, what the Constitution allows for is just that, listen, the life of Parliament comes to an end, it automatically dissolves, and then the election must be called within the 3-month period. Right. But that would not be for good governance. You don't want an executive controlling the state of affairs for up to 3 months if it were to be held closer to the end of the 3-year period. Because that's what you have a legislator for.
Right.
That's where laws are made, and the legislative branch holds the executive to account theoretically. In practicality, no. But yes, it would be for good governance. But again, that's what the Constitution says. But anyway, that's where we have to leave it today. And the winner of the trivia, we announced it earlier.
Yes, that was news commentator. So we'll respond to you with your prize. The question that was responded to was regarding the Occupational Safety and Health Bill, and the question was which legislation did the Occupational Safety and Health Bill replace, and the answer was should replace, and the answer was the Factories Act of 1943.
Yes, 5 years after the labor riots. All right. All right, so have yourselves a good week, and thanks again for tuning in to Let's Talk Justice.
I'm Jade Williams.
And I'm Michael Jackson.
The people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica the known. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities, no to unlawful detention and police brutalization, class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or JamaicансForJustice.org.
The people's champion.
The NHT is lending up to $12 million for homes priced at $14 million or less, making home ownership more accessible for Jamaicans. We are building Jamaica.
The time by the office of the Prime Minister is
2 p.m.
It's Monday. Get over your blues.